Hello, everybody. It's Emma here, Timeless Cookery, and I'm joined today by the lovely Payal from Kobofermentary. And on her, met her on Instagram, and on her profile it says she's a shepherd of microbes, which I just love that. Shepherding the microbes, cultivating the garden of our microbiome, using fermented foods. So welcome, Payal. Lovely to meet you.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks for having me.
You're really welcome. So it says that you've been fermenting since 2001. So you've got a great deal of experience. How did you get into it?
So I started out as a kid, and my grandmother used to ferment a fair bit, and they were all traditional Indian ferments. And I just used to hang out with her, and she would do her projects, and I subconsciously must have picked up a bunch of stuff. And then when I turned 18 in 2001, I just got obsessed with ginger beer, and I just brewed batch after batch after batch. And that kind of was the beginning of my obsession as an adult doing fermentation independently. It's been a crazy ride from there.
And so what, after the ginger beer, what came next? Was it dairy or grains or what?
So dairy was always happening because in India, we eat a lot of yogurt. When I was growing up, everybody made their own yogurt at home. So that was something that was happening anyway. I dabbled a bit with cheese, and I found Sandor Katz's book, Wild Fermentation. And then that got me into, one.
I've got. It's a really old one that it's got a bit battered, but lovely book. He's the granddaddy, isn't he, of fermentation?
The godfather. And it was I think the book kind of brought structure to my passion, and it gave me an outlet to do all of these other things that were different from what I was used to. And so I would just go through the book. If something spoke to me, I would just make that. And that's kind of how I just went on and on and on. And here we are.
So a lot of the people I'm working with, I don't know if you know my work, but I work with GAPS, gut and psychology syndrome. And that is helping people to regain function of a broken digestive system. And of course, ferments are a massive part of that. And we don't do any grains on GAPS because when we have the complex carbohydrates, they can tend to feed the pathogenic bacteria that have got a foothold in our broken digestive systems. So do you I would like to be introducing fermented grains to the people who have managed to fix their gut flora and can now eat grains again. So what would you say is the best thing to start off with if you were reintroducing grains into a diet? Do you know?
So I think that's a good question, because I gave up grains for a very long time, not knowing about the specific diet or anything. I kind of listened to my body a lot more. And so the only grains I eat are fermented grains. And I noticed that if the grains are not fermented, especially certain types of grains, they give me a really bad reaction. And that's even after eating fermented foods for all my life. So it is, it's very complex, because there's all kinds of things that influence it, like where it's grown, the quality of the soil, whether they're organic or not, what kind of variety they are, how they've been harvested, whether they've had pesticides, what sort of pesticides. All of this stuff is messing us up. And a part of it was to go back to how our ancestors ate. And grains for me, like wheat especially, I have a love-hate relationship with. But I eat it occasionally, but as a treat. But if I do, it's almost always sourdough, because I feel like my digestive system is just better able to digest that, as opposed to unfermented wheat. But grains in general, I just like to ferment them anyway because it makes them more digestible. It makes the nutrients more bioavailable, and it's just a nicer eating experience.
Yeah. It's something about gluten, isn't there? Specifically that protein. And I've got grave reservations about the overuse or the introduction, full stop, of glyphosate, as I'm sure everyone's aware of, which is super toxic. And it's actually changing our physiology, I think. And it's working somehow with the gluten to undermine our digestive system. So yeah. Oh, I've got a really unstable internet connection here. Anyway, let's hope we don't cut out again. So yeah, let's just say no grains. I mean, for now. But when we do start to introduce a bit more of the complex carbs in GAPS, we can have lentils, for instance, and I quite often make a kind of lentil batter and then add some 24-hour fermented cream to that to just ferment it a little bit before we make kind of little flat pancake type wraps with, grated carrot and sliced onion. You can make quite a nice little sort of something you can hold like a sandwich kind of thing, bread alternative. But Dr. Natasha says we can use pseudo grains. So the pseudo grains are quinoa and buckwheat. And what else is there that's a pseudo grain? They're actually seeds, they're not grains, but we can treat.
Amaranth one?
Amaranth, that's another one. Yeah. And I mean, my process is just literally to soak them, discard the water, and then to add some kind of starter culture, like a bit of whey or a spoonful of fermented cream or yogurt, or even sauerkraut juice or a kvass or something like that. What do you use to start your grains off?
I usually just use whatever I have on hand, so whatever is accessible, and because I'm also very slow, so it's never planned. It's all very spontaneous. So whatever is accessible, I just throw that in, and that could also include, apart from all the stuff that you use, kombucha or water kefir, even sometimes a sourdough starter. So anything that's active, that's been recently fed, works really well.
Brilliant. I was reading one of your posts and it said something like, you leave it for so much time, or if, like me, you completely forget about it and come back later, it's almost like it doesn't really matter, does it? That's the beauty of fermentation. These are living beings. And I always say to my people, if you think that your ferments are going to go off and go moldy, they probably will, because your intention actually affects the outcome. It's a bit like that experiment that Dr. Emoto did. Do you know Dr. Emoto, the messages in water? I'll just get the book. Hold on. Masaru Emoto, Hidden Messages in Water.
Okay, I'll check that.
He's so fascinating. He's dead now, unfortunately. Very unscientific, but a scientist. And he would take the waters sampled from all over the world, from the sewers of New York, from the springs of the Himalayan mountains, from the monasteries of Turkey. I don't know, people would send him water samples from all over the world. And he devised a method for freezing them into snowflakes and then photographing them, which is quite a feat. So he was doing this for 20 years. And then he would take the photographs and look at how the water crystallized. Yeah. So this is a crystal of some water. Oh, he's been playing music to this water. The water will crystallize differently with different vibrations given to it. Now, of course, our words and our thoughts have vibrations. So he devised, he noticed, first of all, that when he crystallized the water from the sewers, for instance, there were no crystals in the water. It would be a blur. It would freeze, but it wouldn't crystallize into that beautiful hexagonal shape. But then if you filtered the water and vortexed the water and then sent the water thanks and praise and blessings and love, it would crystallize better. So he recognized the fact that our intention has an effect on the water. So if we're looking at our ferments as the boss in the kitchen, we're looking at the ferments and going, oh, I don't know if I know how to ferment. I'm a bit rubbish at this. I don't think I'm doing a very good job. I don't think it's going to turn out right. They can sort of hear you. They sense it. And so it will go moldy. Whereas if you kind of just be a bit free and easy with it and just be like, oh yeah, I'm going to ferment this and it's all good and it's all lovely. Let's see what happens. How wonderful. This is going to be good for my health. That sort of vibe. You tend to end up with much better results. It's really interesting.
I think you're right, because when my grandmother used to ferment, and like especially in pickle season, it was a whole project, and you had to wake up in the morning with the right intention to say a little prayer so that nothing goes wrong with your pickles, because they have to last the rest of the year. And so it became, and I guess this is how ferments have been passed on from generation to generation, almost as rituals, that you have to do these steps one after the other, because otherwise, in a time where we didn't have an understanding of how microbes worked, anything could go wrong and you don't know why. And so these rituals were so important.
How wonderful. Can you remember the prayer she used to say?
It's just like the normal prayer that she had for, she was Jain, so she just used the one, and it's basically a prayer to the universe, and it's not specifically for ferments, but it's just one that you say for anything.
Would you like to share it with us?
Well, I'm not sure I quite remember, but yeah, but it was her prayer, and so she used to say it. And it was just a part of the ritual. And
that sounds like a really important thing to know to me, Payal. Payal. It sounds like a really that's part of our ancestral heritage as human beings on the planet, what our grandparents were saying and the things they were doing and the rituals they had were actually a lot more important than we've kind of let it slip. We need to be giving thanks and, asking for help and asking for guidance and being conscious and aware. And it's so, so important, especially in these crazy days where we've been kind of, corralled into a place of fear.
I've lost you again. Bye.
Oh dear. A bit of a dodgy connection. Hopefully we'll come back in a minute.
Oh yeah, there you are.
Okay, great.
Yeah. I was just saying that Marika, when I learned how to make miso from her, when I watch her on Zoom, and she said once that she once said something that really stuck with me, is that when she makes a batch of miso, she has a label for what the miso is, what percentage of koji, beans, etc. But she also has like a little label that says, here, little miso, be good, do a good job, and I'll see you in a year. And it's kind of like a Japanese way of wishing luck to your ferments to behave.
Brilliant. Exactly. So when Dr. Emoto was doing his experiments, he's Japanese as well. He did a batch of rice and he split it into 3 cooked rice in jars, and he put it in the school place where the children came in to school, into the schoolroom. And one of the jars was labeled I don't know specifically, but it was something positive, like I love you. And then the other jar was I hate you. And the other jar had nothing written on it at all, had no label on it at all. And the children were to come in and say, good morning, Mr. Rice, I love you. And then to the other one, I don't like you, you're horrible, and then ignore the third. So after a month or so, the first rice had fermented into something akin to, it smelt savory, it was somehow smelt palatable, it was an interesting ferment, something that stimulates our senses. The second one had gone rotten and was bad, smelt bad. And then the third one that they ignored was even more putrid, even more broken down. Yeah, no, wow, it was really mind-blowing. It just kind of shows you that children will do anything to be heard or to get attention, even if it's bad attention, because bad attention seems to be more than no attention at all. It's really fascinating, totally unscientific, but it shows something.
Yeah.
So
and in psychology, my background is psychology, and so we have one branch of psychology called transactional analysis, and in that, it's something similar to this. They call them positive and negative strokes, and how important it is for you to get positive strokes, and in the absence of which you're going to ask for negative strokes, because negative strokes are better than no strokes at all.
Word. Okay, so there's a confirmation of that as well. How interesting. So back to pickles then. When it was pickle season and your grandma was, praying for the success of the pickles, come on, tell me how you get a decent, just a little cucumber pickle. How do you keep them crispy?
If I want to keep them super crispy, I will ferment them, like lacto ferment them, and then I put them into sour kombucha.
Right. Okay.
And this is something I figured out by trial and error, because I had a physical fermentary where I used to produce stuff for restaurants and cafes and subscribers, and the pickles would always go soft by the time they were used, and so this was kind of like a stopgap interim solution. And
because I've never managed to get my pickled cucumbers to stay crispy. They've always gone mushy, and I've been like, a bit like, man, how do you get crunchy pickles? So lacto ferment, as in, do you prick them first, or do you just leave them whole?
I actually do them in slices, because that saves fridge space, and I don't have a crock that's that big to put in whole cucumbers. So I just do slices, and that way this keeps it.
So I've still got 3 big cucumbers left over from the polytunnel to this year here, and now in November they're just sitting there. They've gone a bit. They're starting to yellow a little bit, so they're not as fresh as they could be. But do you think I could still peel those, seed them, and ferment the flesh? Lacto ferment the flesh?
I think so. And if they go mushy, that's okay. Just turn it into a relish and
perfect. Of course, there's no such thing as a gone off ferment, is there? Really, it's just gone over and changed and morphed into something else. I love it. So how long would you lacto ferment your fresh cucumbers or your slices then before you put them into a sour kombucha?
So I do them because I'm in India and it's much warmer than it would be for you even in France or England. So I do them for a shorter time. But if I can, and if I have fridge space, then I just stick them in the fridge and let them ferment low and slow for a longer time. So maybe about like 5 days or so. Sometimes 10. I forget stuff all the time. So
you just kind of open it up and have a smell and have a little taste and see what it's like, and then think, oh yeah, exactly. I can leave that a bit longer. Or because I'm teaching people about ferments, as you do. They're always like, yes, but can you tell me exactly, how much salt and how much this and how much that and how long and what's the temperature? And I said, there's so many variables I can't possibly specify. And the point is to have the right attitude of reverence and gratitude, and then to try to suck it and see what happens, just try. And get hold of a SCOBY, get a hold of a kombucha SCOBY, and you'll see if you put that much sugar in and leave it for that long, then it'll be like that. But if you leave it for a bit longer, it'll be more like vinegar. So what a great tip about putting your pickled cucumbers into a sour kombucha. It's a bit like a vinegar then, isn't it? It's like a vinegar kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, but it's still alive, and so it does a really good job of keeping them crisp, but also still fermenting them. That flavor, that funk is still there, and I've had very good feedback with those with that hybrid combination.
That is a great tip. So you're a real pro. You've been providing ferments for the restaurants and things, eh? How do you do it on such a big scale?
Well, I don't anymore. I shut it down at the beginning of the first lockdown last year, when the pandemic started. But I ran it for about a year and a half. So I was producing kombucha, and water kefir, milk kefir, hot sauces, and a bunch of lactoferments. And I had a bunch of subscribers, and I was retailing it at a couple of places and also supplying to restaurants and cafes. But it was a decision that the lockdown accelerated. It would have happened anyway, I guess. And what I do now is much better for my soul. So yeah, I'm happy.
How lovely. You've got more time at home. And do you have a family?
I have a husband that I live with. He's half Irish, half German. And so, yeah, he's been in India 14 years now.
Oh, wow. That's the international connection there. Lovely. Yeah. So fabulous. So what can people work with you now then? Because Kobofermentary is on Instagram. I haven't really delved into any other social media that you've got going on, but see, you've got...
I don't, just Instagram. Yeah.
Right. And can people work with you?
Work with me as in...
do you teach people? Or... No. Do you teach?
Yeah.
Learn from you, I should say.
Yeah, I do workshops at on the last Sunday of every month, and they could be different things. It's really just whatever I feel like that month. Like there's no real plan around it. But yeah, I just put that up on Instagram, and then I do Zoom workshops. So that's once a month, and I answer questions on Instagram stories every Saturday. So if any fermentation question or otherwise, and if I don't know, then I try and ask people who might know and try and find an answer.
That's wonderful. Really spreading the word there. It's really crucial information for people, because I believe that Sandor Hans, the granddaddy of fermentation, I believe that he had in the 80s a diagnosis of HIV, I think, but it doesn't seem to have bothered him in the slightest. Well, from what I've read, what do I know? I don't know him or anything, but the point is that was a viral infection, supposedly, and he seems to be strong and still forging ahead, spreading the word of the food as the medicine. So let that be a lesson to us all about how important the ferments are. So what's your absolute favorite ferment? What could you not live without?
Oh, that's a really tough question, but I think if you put a gun to my head, I'd say koji, because I think it's changed how I cook. Like it has changed so much, and it's almost as if you know how fire and salt kind of transformed food. Koji is the next one, and so I really believe that it is important for anybody that cooks to have that in their kitchen.
Heck, well, you better tell me all about it, because I don't even know what koji is. I haven't read the whole of the. I have flicked through the wild fermentation, and I know he mentions it, but I haven't really studied it. What is it? How do you do it?
So koji itself is this mold, and it kind of coincided with the the agricultural revolution of rice. And so it grows on the husk, and but it's more complex. There's different strains, and it was first started, the use of it was first in China, I think, but what we know now is that the Japanese have domesticated this into one single strain, and they have been using it for thousands of years to make soy sauce, to make sake, to make mirin, to make miso, to make all kinds of stuff that that comes out of Japan. And so this stuff, the mold is inoculated on rice in an incubator at a certain temperature, at a certain humidity level. And once so you know tempeh?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
so
a soy ferment, isn't it?
It can be grown on soy, but it can be grown on other things as well.
Okay, I didn't know that.
On quinoa, on white rice, on all kinds of stuff.
So where would you go about finding your initial source of tempeh, or your initial source of koji?
It's koji, yeah.
Koji, yeah.
Koji spores, I get mine from Japan, but if you want smaller ones in Europe, there's somebody, I think it's in Austria, I could be wrong, Austria or Germany, somebody there who's doing them, and in the US as well. So, and there's lots of smaller suppliers who are kind of buying from spore makers, and these are like 7th generation spore like harvesters, producers.
Wow.
In Japan, who people are buying from, and sort of repackaging them into different types of spores, different things that different spores for different applications. So if you want to make soy sauce, then you use a different spore, and then if you want to make amazake or you want to make miso, there's different types of spores.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So do you make your own soy sauce, and do you make your own miso?
Miso, yes. Soy sauce, I'm still working on the few batches that I tried didn't quite work out as well. So I'm still figuring out how to do that. But tamari and miso, there's also short-term ferments that you can make with it that are just sitting in your rice cooker overnight, and it transforms all the starches into sugar. So it's kind of like a natural source that doesn't affect your body in terms of glucose as much as sugar would. Nice. So it's I think I would check that with the nutritionist. I'm not quite sure, but I feel that myself when I eat it. It's a more sort of slow release, lower GI type stuff. It doesn't give me this.
Nice, yeah. Nice. It's interesting that it's a mold, which is, you know, like Roquefort and Roquefort cheese. Is that blue mold? That's a mold, isn't it? Have I frozen again? Can you still hear me? Roquefort cheese and Stilton, they're blue, they're molds, aren't they? And everyone's very concerned at the moment about Candida, which is a fungus, and everyone's very concerned about black mold in houses and things, which I think is stimulated, the black mold in houses that we're all struggling with, I think is stimulated by the EMF frequencies that we've got around us now these days, because the molds actually are threatened by the EMF. And so they proliferate because they feel as though they're going to die. So they're like reproducing as quickly as they can to try and stay alive, you know. And it's interesting, you talk about a mold ferment. We don't often hear people talking about a mold ferment because mold sounds like a really scary thing. But actually, I think we're going to have to start fighting fire with fire. So as people are struggling with black mold and struggling with Candida, which is a fungus, not a mold, but you know, these networks of microbes all have relationships. And it's impossible for us to really understand what those relationships are, because in our reductionist sort of scientism that we live with these days, which is not really science, it's more like a religion, we've just been taught to isolate, to isolate things and study them in isolation, which is a ridiculous idea when you think that we're living in symbiotic harmony with trillions upon trillions upon trillions of different molds, fungus, bacteria. Now, virus isn't alive as in it can replicate, but it can't reproduce. But all of these things work together in a wondrous universal dance. You know, we are sort of the microcosms of the macrocosm. And what we really need to do is be culturing and cultivating the gardens of these microbiomes, both in the fermentation jar and within ourselves. And within the wider world, you know, encouraging biodiversity in soil microbes and soil you know, which is, you know, the soil has just been slaughtered virtually by the industrial food system and all the ploughing. But the good news is, in 2019, I met Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride at a groundswell ag conference in the UK, where the big boys with their big toys, as in the massive farmers with their massive areas of land, with their huge machinery, who have been turning the soil upside down and upsetting that wondrous symbiotic relationship with all of the fungus and the microbes that live in the soil, have realized the errors of their ways and have said, heck, we need to do something better than this. So they're working with their big toys, the big boys with their big toys. They're now working with no-till agriculture, a lot of them. And that symposium that I went to, that conference, that agriculture conference, groundswell.ag in 2019, I think that was the fourth one they had. It's been going now for maybe 6-7 years now. John Cherry, his name, is the farmer who started it in the UK. And it's great to have these big farmers with the big areas of land realizing that we've got to stop poisoning the land with the agri-chemicals, and we've got to stop turning it upside down. We've got to start encouraging building of soil with organic matter and inoculating it with compost teas, which are like ferments for the soil, you know.
Absolutely.
So it's a, you know, microcosm, macrocosm, it's across the board. You know, the bugs are what allows us to actually survive, isn't it? So anyone out there who's thinking about starting to ferment, you know, there are some amazing people out there. You just need to get out there and, you know, meet them, look around on Instagram. There's, you know, when you find somebody as precious as Pyle here with her Kobofermentary, you can look at who she follows and sort of get that network built up so that you can, get well using ferments. So, thank you so much for joining me, Pyle. I'm really so grateful, and it's been a fascinating conversation. If you do manage to remember that prayer that your grandma came up with, I mean, would your mum remember it maybe? I don't know.
She would, yeah. I'll get that from her.
It would be a really precious thing to have, you know, really, really precious. We could keep it alive. I'm always looking for new, you know, I say affirmations or, you know, state my intent every day, or call it a prayer, whatever you want to call it. I don't really mind what you call it and who you're talking to. I feel as though I'm talking to the highest good. That's who I want to connect with. And keeping those
and the universe.
Yeah, exactly. So lovely to meet you. And I encourage everyone to go over and follow Kobofermentary on Instagram.
Thank you.
Lots of love.